Good evening. We can reveal tonight King's Cross identity John Ibrahim as the target of an alleged botched assassination attempt at Dover Heights 2 months ago.
You've just seen it. John Ibrahim stepping out like he's done it 100 times. Calm, silent, untouchable. But behind that quiet confidence is one of the most mysterious figures in Australian crime history. They call him the King of the Cross, a man who rose from the streets of Western Sydney to dominate one of the most dangerous and lucrative nightlife strips in the country. And yet, in a world where associates are either shot, jailed, or flipped, John Ibrahim never served a day for a major crime. Not for drugs, not for guns, not even for the string of nightclubs that allegedly masked a web of underworld deals, gang ties, and silent wars. He moved in a world of bikies, corrupt cops, and nightclub kings, always nearby, never caught. Was it discipline, connections, or something darker? This documentary peels back the layers behind the myth. We'll trace the rise of a man who survived stabbings, dodged raids, and outlasted empires. From street fights to luxury estates, from headlines to silence, this is the story of John Ibrahim, a man who never needed a crown to rule the cross. Before the myth, there was just a boy, one of 6 children, crammed into a modest home in Sydney's gritty west. John Hussam Ibrahim was born in 1970 in war-ravaged Tripoli, Lebanon, but his family didn't stay long. Like many Lebanese Australians in the 1970s, the Ibrahims came to Australia in search of safety, stability, and a future. But the western suburbs of Sydney weren't easy ground for migrants. Violence, racism, poverty, it was everywhere. At Granville Boys High School, John was constantly fighting, both in the classroom and out. He was small but scrappy, sharp with his words and his fists. His older brother Sam had already developed a reputation as someone not to mess with, and John was quick to follow suit. By 16, John had dropped out of school and started working as a bouncer in King's Cross, Sydney's red light district and criminal playground. The Cross in the 1980s was chaos. Drugs flooded the streets, bikie gangs controlled the doors, and violence was routine. For most teens, it was the kind of place parents warned you to stay away from. For John, it was where he felt alive. Then came the night that would make him a name. In 1987, outside a King's Cross nightclub, John got into a fight. What started as a scuffle turned brutal when one of the men pulled a knife. The blade sank into John's chest. Deep. It punctured his lung and narrowly missed his heart. He collapsed, blood pouring onto the pavement. Paramedics rushed him to hospital. For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't make it. But he did. And when the police asked him who stabbed him, he said nothing. That silence changed everything. In King's Cross, keeping quiet earned you respect. It meant you weren't a rat. It meant you understood the rules of the street. And from that moment on, John Ibrahim wasn't just a teenage bouncer anymore. He was someone who'd been tested and survived. Word of the stabbing and his silence spread quickly. People who never looked twice before now remembered his name. Gangsters respected him. Club owners started paying attention. The streets spoke, and what they said was simple: this kid's for real. But John wasn't just some street soldier. He had vision. He saw beyond the chaos. While others chased fast money through drugs and muscle, he saw the value in influence, in building something. And he knew King's Cross had more to offer than just fights and cash drops. It had power. In the years that followed, John began carving out his place in the Cross. He built connections with nightclub owners, gained favor with underworld figures, and started investing, quietly, carefully. While his brother Sam was the firebrand, loud, aggressive, confrontational, John was the shadow, watching, listening, moving when it mattered. He soon began managing security at multiple clubs, not just bouncing troublemakers at the door, but controlling who got in, who stayed out, and who paid for protection. And in a place like King's Cross, that kind of control was everything. Police began to notice. So did journalists. His name appeared in reports. His face turned up in surveillance photos. But John never took the bait. He rarely spoke publicly. He didn't flash money. And he never, ever talked to cops. To outsiders, it looked like he came out of nowhere. But the truth is, it started here. With a knife to the chest, a code of silence, and a teenager who saw more than the street in front of him. The King of the Cross wasn't crowned overnight. He bled for it. By the early 1990s, King's Cross was evolving, and so was John Ibrahim. The drug scene was exploding, and bikie gangs like the Nomads and Comancheros were fighting for slices of the nightlife pie. But while others waged wars with guns and fists, John carved his kingdom using charm, loyalty, and strategy. He wasn't a typical gangster. No tattoos, no gold chains, no wild outbursts. Instead, he operated from the VIP lounges and back offices of Sydney's most notorious clubs. John knew that in the Cross, power didn't come from fear. It came from access. At just 22, he made his first major move, buying into the Tunnel nightclub, one of Sydney's hottest spots at the time. It was bold, unheard of, and it sent a message. He wasn't just managing the scene anymore. He was becoming the scene. From there, his empire grew. By the mid-2000s, John Ibrahim had interests in or influence over up to 17 venues across King's Cross. Among them, Dragonfly, Trademark, The Tunnel, and the legendary EP1. Each venue became part of a larger network, a web of nightlife, influence, and underground loyalty. Police believed these clubs weren't just about music and drinks. They suspected they were fronts for laundering drug money, hosting secret underworld meetings, and distributing ecstasy, cocaine, and methamphetamine through a tightly controlled circuit of trusted associates. But despite constant surveillance and dozens of raids over the years, no major charges ever stuck. That's the thing about John. He always moved just outside the blast zone. The media, however, didn't let up. He was dubbed the Teflon Don of King's Cross. Tabloids ran his name alongside every major crime story, from fatal overdoses to gangland executions, even when there was no direct link. Police would later say they believed John had real power in the Cross, even if they couldn't prove it in court. Still, Ibrahim played it smart. While others bragged or flashed cash, he built relationships with everyone: club owners, gangsters, cops, politicians, even journalists. If there was a lever of power in Sydney, odds were John had already figured out how to lean on it. His real estate portfolio began to grow too. From inner-city apartments to waterfront mansions, John started flipping properties and investing millions. Some were bought under family names, others through trusts or shell companies. The paper trail was complex, just like the man himself. But it wasn't all quiet moves and nightclub takeovers. Tensions were rising in the underworld. The Ibrahim name was becoming a lightning rod. And while John preferred to play diplomat, others in his circle weren't so restrained. His older brother Sam, a former Nomads bikie and known enforcer, frequently clashed with police and rival gangs. Younger brother Michael was also emerging as a major player, though far more volatile. Associates like Fadi and others in their orbit were known to be involved in heavy-level drug deals, weapons, and extortion. And that was the danger for John. Even if he kept clean hands, he was surrounded by fire. Still, through all the chaos, he maintained one golden rule: keep your name out of the paperwork and your hands off the product. Let others take the risk. Let others front the operation. John would simply own the room. To his enemies, he was an enabler. To his supporters, a survivor. But no one could deny that Ibrahim had done what few others could: turn King's Cross into a personal fiefdom without ever firing a shot. He didn't need muscle. he had something far more dangerous: influence. By the mid-2000s, John Ibrahim was no longer just a name whispered in back rooms. He was front-page news. The media couldn't get enough of him. Every photo, every court appearance involving his brothers or associates came with his name splashed across the headlines, even when he wasn't charged. But while the public devoured stories about the so-called King of the Cross, behind the scenes, law enforcement was building a case. A long one. Task Force Gain, Operation Veda, and multiple covert operations were launched over the years with one goal: to prove that John Ibrahim was more than a nightclub boss. Police believed he was the central figure in a sprawling underworld network tied to drugs, bikies, and international smuggling. They just couldn't pin it on him. Listening devices were installed in his home. His phones were tapped. Undercover officers infiltrated clubs, security companies, and even his extended social circle. Yet again and again, investigators came up empty. There were plenty of close calls, drug raids, violence, even murders linked to his circle. But John's name was never on the documents, never on the wiretap, never directly in possession. It became a running joke. Ibrahim was ghost clean. Some said it was because he was smart. Others believed it was something deeper: corruption, protection, or perhaps an unspoken understanding between certain officials and the man who unofficially kept the cross running smoothly. Whatever it was, it worked. In 2009, when NS Dollars police launched a high-profile crackdown on King's Cross under the Enough is Enough banner, several venues were raided. Licenses were stripped, illegal activities exposed. Yet Ibrahim walked away, untouched. Once again, others went down. He didn't, but the pressure was mounting. A series of events over the next few years began closing in on his inner circle. His brother Sam was arrested on firearms and kidnapping charges. Michael was named in major drug investigations. Associates and former allies began flipping or disappearing. And the violence on the streets? It was getting harder to ignore. In 2011, after years of simmering tensions, John's girlfriend, Sarah Budge, was linked to a high-profile case involving an illegal firearm allegedly found in her apartment. The media again circled. Ibrahim denied knowledge. She fought the charges and won. That same year, King's Cross itself was changing. The introduction of lockout laws and growing public scrutiny began gutting the nightlife scene. Clubs closed, streets emptied. What was once John Ibrahim's kingdom was now a ghost town. Still, the legend held strong. Despite all the pressure, Ibrahim remained calm, composed, even philosophical in interviews. "I've never been convicted of anything," he said more than once. "Everything I've got, I earned." But that didn't stop the surveillance. Police continued monitoring his movements at airports, in restaurants, even at family functions. They believed his brothers were expanding into international networks. Dubai, Lebanon, the Netherlands, places where Australian authorities had less reach and criminal empires were harder to trace. In 2017, the largest operation yet would take shape. Operation Veda. Federal and international police, customs, intelligence agencies, all working together. A plane was intercepted, drugs seized, homes raided across Sydney. John's home was one of them. So did the public perception of John Ibrahim as the untouchable nightlife king. But Ibrahim wasn't finished. He had already started pivoting years earlier. As the club scene collapsed, he leaned harder into property. By this point, he was reportedly worth tens of millions, much of it tied up in real estate across Sydney. From inner-city apartments to beachside mansions and commercial buildings, John's focus had shifted from velvet ropes to bricks and mortar. Despite his underworld reputation, there was no denying he had a keen business sense. He knew where to buy, when to flip, and how to keep his name clean in the paperwork. To outsiders, He now looked less like a gangster and more like a savvy, if controversial, property developer. In 2017, he added another unexpected twist to his public image. He became an author. His memoir, Last King of the Cross, was part confession, part myth-making. It offered a highly stylized account of his rise, from immigrant kid to nightclub mogul. The book was marketed as an inside look at Sydney's criminal underworld, but it left more questions than answers. Ibrahim denied being a criminal, but didn't hide the violence, the money, or the corruption that surrounded him. The book sold well and stirred media buzz, reinforcing the legend rather than resolving it. Then came the TV adaptation. In 2023, Last King of the Cross was turned into a high-profile Australian drama series, with Ibrahim involved behind the scenes. The show blurred lines between fact and fiction, mixing nightclub glitz with underworld grit. Some critics praised it, others accused it of glorifying crime. But one thing was clear: John Ibrahim had turned his own myth into marketable entertainment. And yet, even with the rebranding, the legend still came with shadows. Law enforcement hadn't forgotten. Though charges rarely stuck, surveillance never truly stopped. He still drew headlines whenever associates were arrested or shot. He still made front pages, just now in a designer suit instead of behind police tape. His family name remained a magnet for controversy. Michael Ibrahim continued facing court proceedings. Sam, released from prison, maintained a low profile but remained known to police. Associates from the old King's Cross days were either dead, in jail, or out of the game. But John, he was still standing. Over the years, public perception had shifted. To some, John Ibrahim was still a dangerous man with ties to serious crime. To others, he was a misunderstood businessman who played by his own rules and beat the system at its own game. But perhaps the most telling detail is this. In an environment where nearly every player fell by bullet, betrayal, or bars, John Ibrahim didn't just survive. He adapted. And in doing so, he became something more than a king of clubs or a name in a police file. He became a brand. Behind the headlines, the TV shows, and the decades of scrutiny, who is John Ibrahim, really? For years, he's kept that answer deliberately blurred. To law enforcement, he remains a figure of interest. To some in the public, he's a gangster who got lucky. To others, he's a misunderstood businessman who got tired of defending his name. What's undeniable is this: John Ibrahim never let the system define him. He made himself untouchable, not by force, but by finesse. He stayed off the books. He never dealt drugs directly. He never pulled a trigger. And when people around him went down, he stayed silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because silence was his greatest asset. But even the strongest myths have their cracks. The scars from that 1987 stabbing are still there, etched into his chest and into his story. His family, for all their loyalty, has been battered by legal wars, prison time, and violence. And as John himself has admitted, living under constant surveillance and suspicion comes at a cost. He never married, he rarely gives interviews, and despite all the luxury, his life is far from carefree. Still, he remains calm. Even when his girlfriend was on trial, even when his home was raided, even when people around him were extradited, assassinated, or turned informant, he kept the same steady gaze. It's not arrogance, it's discipline. Because the truth is, John Ibrahim never wanted to be a gangster. He wanted control. Control over his life, his business, his story. And for the most part, he got it. Even his critics admit he played the long game better than anyone. His memoir, his TV series, his real estate moves, they all point to the same truth. John is no longer just a man. He's a brand, carefully managed, infinitely profitable, and still impossible to pin down. And yet, despite all the mystique, there's something human underneath it all. A Lebanese kid from a war-torn country, a teenager stabbed on the sidewalk, a man who buried friends, a brother who bailed family out, a survivor of an era that destroyed nearly everyone else involved. Is he guilty? Is he innocent? The law says one thing, the streets say another. What's clear is that John Ibrahim is the last of a dying breed, a man who saw the system, understood it, and chose to build his kingdom just outside its reach. He didn't wear a crown. He didn't need to. The cross bowed anyway.